I was doing a lot of research on bioplastics and fibers and came across this one idea of gelatin fibers. Slaughterhouses produce a lot of waste, over 10 million tons a year in the EU alone. A lot of what gets wasted is like the bones and the skin of animals, which can really easily be turned into gelatin. What makes gelatin fibers great is that they can just be used like any other string would, and they're really easy to make. This was a really fun project to research and make, so enjoy! For this project, we're going to need some gelatin, isopropyl alcohol, water, something to heat the water up in, thermometer, gloves, syringes, test tubes or other resealable plastic containers, a Sharpie, and some tape. You're going to start by mixing your gelatin, isopropyl alcohol, and water together in your test tubes. I couldn't remember the exact ratio of gelatin to water and isopropyl alcohol, so I made 5 different mixtures to figure out which one would work best. That was kind of fun because they all came out with a slightly different consistency, but if you just want to do the ratio that worked best, no judgment. For my first tube, I put 10 milliliters of gelatin in it, and then 15 milliliters of isopropyl and 15 milliliters of water. Make sure your containers are actually open before you start because that's kind of an important step. Put your gloves on too, and highly recommend that you do not do this on a finished wood table. Not a good idea. Well, anyways, once you've got all that sorted out, just put the cap on and shake, shake, shake. This one turned out okay in the end. It was kind of liquidy and produced something closer to like what's inside of a cassette tape, if you know what that is. My second tube was equal parts gelatin, isopropyl, and water, so I did 15 milliliters each. This one was definitely the winner out of all of the ratios I tried. If you only do one ratio, definitely do this one. It made a nice shiny white string that was strong and flexible. The third one didn't work at all. It was 5 milliliters gelatin, 20 milliliters of isopropyl, and 20 milliliters of water. This one came out really, really liquidy, so it didn't really press out. It just kind of was like soup. Halfway through, I realized I should probably be writing down these numbers because if I wanted to draw any conclusions, I would kind of need that. If you're also trying out different ratios, you might want to do this too, but if you're just following my second ratio, so equal parts, then I guess you don't have to. For my fourth tube, I did 10 milliliters of gelatin, 12.5 milliliters of isopropyl, and 12.5 milliliters of water. This one was the second best, so you should do it if you want to do more than one, but not all 5. My last ratio was 12.5 milliliters gelatin, 15 milliliters isopropyl, and 15 milliliters of water. My guess is that this one probably would have worked if I had waited a bit longer, but in the moment I thought that it would not work, so I did not try to use it. If you're trying out different ratios, then write down the numbers on the tubes, otherwise you're not going to be able to tell the difference between them. And use a Sharpie because other markers will wash away in the water. Okay, now we're going to give our tubes a nice warm bath, aka 50 degrees Celsius or 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Anywhere between 40 and 60 degrees is fine though. Again, really, just don't do this on a wooden table. I somehow got alcohol on the table and it like bleached it or something. I don't know, it turned white. Honestly, not surprised. But just do this outside or like on a marble counter. Get yourself a small plate or something else to weigh down your tubes so they stay underwater. Here's where I messed up. So they actually shouldn't just be floating around because that makes it hard for the layers to separate, which is what we want. So somehow try and like make sure that the tubes are upright when they're in the water. The thermometer is there just to like make sure that the water doesn't get too cold. And if it's going under like 43, then just add some more hot water and switch it out. You should be shaking your tubes like every 15 minutes. And then after like 30 minutes to an hour, if they're upright in the water, then the layers should have separated. I did it wrong, so it was really late by the time I realized that. So I put it in an incubator overnight, which my dad uses to make yogurt. But in the morning, they were mostly separated. So that's what should happen if you do it right, and it should only take like an hour. This is me the next day checking them. The lighting's a bit bad, but you should be able to see the difference between the tubes when I get upstairs. Here's the fun part where you get to actually make the fibers. So this was the first one. Remember, that was 10 gelatin, 15 isopropyl and water. This was my first one, so I didn't really know what the best way to do it was. I decided to suck up the bottom part that's separated without first pouring off the top. As you can see, it was very liquidy, probably not the best way, especially since that one was already a pretty liquidy solution. The second one was equal parts. This one was really good. So I poured off the supernatant on top, and I was just left with like the jelly stuff on the bottom. So I sucked that up with the syringe, and it was kind of liquidy, but I think once it kind of cooled down, because it was pretty warm in the incubator, it was more pressable. I put tape on my table because I didn't want the strings to stick to the table, obviously, and the tape is kind of just like non-stick, I guess. As the solution started cooling down to room temperature, it got much less liquidy and became kind of like slime. I don't know, but it was really fun to play with. You can see how shiny the fibers are here, which is like one of the reasons why they're so cool, because a lot of animal fibers have like these overlapping like scales almost on them, which make them like matte and not shiny like these fibers are. So yeah, they're a lot of fun. You can stretch them out, do lots of things. That was the third one. It didn't really separate at all, so I didn't even attempt that one. The fourth one was, again, it was pretty good. I poured off the top, sucked up the bottom. It was a little bit chunky at first, but it worked out. I wasn't too good about like even pressure on the syringe, so if it was a machine, it probably would have come out a lot better. But it was actually really cool to compare the different thicknesses and see how that affected the strength and rigidity. Once the strings kind of start drying a bit and are like no longer as liquidy and you can like actually hold them, they're really fun to like stretch and play with. And the more you stretch the strings, the stronger they actually get. So that's what's so cool about this, is that when you stretch the strings, the protein chains, they align, just like if you were to stretch a plastic bag. You know how when you stretch a plastic bag, like the more you stretch it, the harder it is to break. So that's the same thing here. When I was opening the cap of number 2 to do it again, I found this little circle thing. It was just some of the solution that stuck to the lid. It had already partially solidified, so it was like a flexible gel spongy thingy. So I put it aside to see what would happen when it dried. And it made like this film that was like a semi-rigid plastic thing. It held up really well when I was bending it and putting pressure on it. So I think this material could also be made into plastic films and packaging, and that would work really well. If you're making the fibers and the solution is kind of hardening on you before you want it to, just try and keep the tubes in the water bath or wherever you have them, because once they cool down, then they harden and it's really, really hard to press out into thin strips. But you also don't want them too warm because then they're too liquidy, like with the first couple of strings that I made. They should be all dry in a couple hours. It's not really very precise. Just whenever you see that they're dry, you can peel them off and like play with them. See how strong they are, how flexible they are, if they can stretch, if they can hold something up, all sorts of things. Just run wild. This was the plate of solution that I squirted out at the beginning, because I thought that it was too liquidy, but it actually hardened and turned into like a gel. But in a few days, it's just gonna become like a thick, hard, rigid plastic, which is also cool, but goes to show you that there's way more you can do with this solution than just baking fibers. Different thicknesses had different strengths. Like the thicker ones were really strong, but the thin ones broke pretty easily. It was so cool to be able to make functional fibers and films out of only 3 really basic ingredients. I'll definitely be doing this again a lot in the future and switching things up to see what I can come up with.
Hey y'all, hope you enjoyed the video. I had a lot of fun making the fibers. I hope you do too. Until next time, like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Bye!